In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing the show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube. Hello and welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Michael Bloom.
And I'm Nathan Seelove.
Tonight we have another exciting, but also nerve-wracking episode. Probably infuriating. There's probably going to be some infuriation as part of this episode.
Wait, do we talk about things that make people angry on this pod?
Honestly, I know we joke about it. The shit we talk about is important. I've gone back and listened to some episodes, and I'm proud of the work we do, and I'm proud that we don't always get it 100% right. Although we're right a surprising percentage of the time, especially with predictions. But yeah. I feel like we don't shy away from talking about things that actually fucking matter. And maybe that's exhausting sometimes, which is why we try to break it up with some levity. But it's, I don't know. I feel like we're doing important stuff here. And I hope the listeners feel the same way.
I agree. I hope the listeners are feel educated. But one of the things that I also was thinking about this week before we get into the segments.
Yeah.
One of the things that studies have shown that is the reason why a lot of people check out of politics is specifically because they don't feel like they can actually do something.
Sure.
And in fact, one of the biggest reasons that you can infer for why the current generation is less informed about politics than previous generations at the same age is not necessarily because they're just lazy. It's because they've been repeatedly,
demoralized,
broken down, demoralized by the system, demoralized by events. And I hope that when you listen to this pod, despite the fact that we do talk about some really serious topics, some really, sad topics, that you really do feel a sense of there is still hope. There is still something that you can do, even if it's just educating yourself about the truth and trying to spread that truth around. Reality can only be pushed back for so long.
Totally. I think that is so true. One of the biggest divides in politics today is between people that pay attention to politics and people who don't. That is a better predictor of how you'll vote and than pretty much any other thing. And so paying attention really matters because to your point, it's being informed and educated on these topics is going to make you better at doing your civic duty, but also just making better decisions and being informed about the world. But also with our Tips for Good segment, talking about small things we can all do to make the world better, or here's why that's bullshit, which will show up in this particular episode, which helps people with short responses to common misinformation and disinformation. These are small things that can really help, especially the Here's Why That's Bullshit segment, and our segments on immigration and our segments on harm reduction with drug use, and all of this stuff is empowering so that maybe you're not confident enough or ready to contradict someone when they state something that's false, but being able to mark that in your own head and go, actually, I know the truth of the matter on this subject. That's a moment of empowerment. It's a moment that you've resisted misinformation and disinformation. And hopefully that's something that we bring as part of this series of episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
what the fuck are we actually talking about tonight?
On what topics are we going to bring that tonight, Michael?
All right. So first off, we're starting with Ukraine. It's been a while since we've talked about the war in Ukraine, especially with the new administration. Things are happening and evolving. And so we're going to talk about the Trump administration's recent actions in Ukraine and so far their posture towards the country and the war that's going on there. And then in our second segment, we are talking about the Democratic Party, which I know we do a lot, but we're trying to break down some of the core problems with the Democratic Party, talk about the lack of leadership and how important that is to setting not only direction, but also the standards that we expect from our Democratic politicians, and being able to hold them to a higher standard than their Republican counterparts.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get right into it, brother. There's so much to talk about with regard to Ukraine. First off, what the hell has been going on in Ukraine since the last time we discussed it? Well, just as a little recap, in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine with basically the argument of, oh, well, we're going there to try to protect Russian citizens, like Russian-speaking citizens, which was bullshit. We're going in there because neo-Nazis are in charge of the country, which is bullshit. We're going in there because, they're about to join NATO, which is bullshit. This war has continued to rage on since that initial invasion. Now, early on, everyone, the entire world thought that this war was probably going to be over in like a few days, a few weeks, few months tops. Because the assumption is Russia is a world superpower.
Yeah.
They're a Goliath.
Yep. And a nuclear-enabled power.
And that their taking over of Ukraine would probably be pretty swift, and it would not take very long. But that's not exactly how it went, because apparently the Ukrainians are a bunch of fucking badasses. And despite the fact that there has been tens of thousands of civilian casualties, tens of thousands of people that have needlessly lost their lives because of the whims of a dictator like Vladimir Putin, despite the fact that there has been countless damage, there has been over 200,000 residential buildings that have been destroyed or damaged during the course of this war. Despite all of that, the Ukrainians have been holding their own and were able to take back a lot of territory that was initially taken by Russia. Today, Russia controls approximately 18% of the country of Ukraine. And so far, there's been kind of just heavy fighting, heavy losses on both sides currently. But there's kind of been a bit of a standstill in terms of territorial, in terms of who's taking over what territory.
Yeah, and from the political front in the United States, which is partially what we're going to be talking about today, things have really shifted over that period of time as well. Like, we started off with a lot of support and sympathy for Ukraine, a lot of general support for the country, as well as the military and monetary contributions to the country. Over time, especially as the conditions have gotten harder and harder in the United States, that support publicly and politically for Ukraine has waned. And now Ukraine has become a pretty partisan political issue where Republicans are really trying to fight back against the ongoing support for the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government, and basically supporting Ukraine in maintaining its sovereignty. And so, more than before, even at the start of the war, Ukraine is on an unsure footing with regard to their ability to continue to fight and wage this war, because our contributions to their military effort have been critical for their national defense. And so that kind of is what brings us to our current position and where we stand today, with the Trump presidency really shifting the ground underneath Ukraine's feet in response to these political whims of the country.
Yeah. And I just want to point out something. I, in the past, have been hesitant to go along with the common Democratic narrative, the common media narrative that Trump is basically Putin's puppet.
Yeah.
I've actually been very hesitant to go along with that.
Yeah, same.
I never, there were some times every now and then that I wondered, oh, was there collusion? Was there not collusion? But honestly, fairly soon during that whole investigation, I remember thinking I don't think that you're going to find evidence that he's a Manchurian style candidate. Now, that being said, the fact that he specifically called for Russia to hack into Hillary Clinton's emails in the 2016 election, that was horrible. That was inappropriate.
But the thing with Trump is it's kind of like Hanslon's razor, which is never attribute to malice what is adequately explained with stupidity.
Yeah.
In Trump's case, it's you don't necessarily need to attribute to corruption what can be explained by his own admiration of dictators, stupidity, and like self-interest. And I think that and so I have also been hesitant to weigh in on like the potentially conspiratorial angle of Trump's direct influence from Moscow.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that there's like a PP tape as it's called. Like I don't think that there's like a blackmail piss tape that Putin is holding over Trump. And part of why I don't think that is because if you look at some of the policies in Trump's first administration, there are actually some areas in which he was probably more hawkish to Russia than he should have been, where the criticism should have actually been, hey, you're antagonizing a little bit. You gotta pull back a little bit.
Yeah. But also because of all the things, why the fuck would Trump care about a P tape? Honestly,
honestly, at this
he
point,
might be one of the less blackmailable people. Bribable for sure, but blackmailable maybe not.
Well, that's the thing. Like he's like it's the Teflon Don. Like literally, I think that the PP tape could come out tomorrow, and his supporters would start posting videos of themselves getting pissed on in support.
Yeah, exactly. They would start buying small jars of pee.
like honestly, it's like but. The point I'm trying, like, I'm saying all of this so that I can get to the gut punch of my point, which is that despite the fact that I've been hesitant to say any of that stuff in the past, despite the fact that I've been hesitant to go along with that media narrative, I can confidently say right now that in this moment, President Trump is Vladimir Putin's bitch.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's true.
Absolutely Vladimir Putin's bitch.
Yeah.
Like, there is no other way of saying it. There are fucking Russian propaganda talking points that are like really easily disprovable in the United States because we have access to information. In Russia, they try to restrict information. In the United States, we actually have access to information where we can easily disprove some of this utter fucking bullshit that that Putin has been trying to say. But Trump is just fucking going along with some of the most atrocious, moronic claims. Like, first off, one of the Trump talking points is that Ukraine started the war.
Yep.
Like, he said, quote, "You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. You should have never started it. They were the ones who were fucking invaded." I do understand that Trump doesn't exactly have the best track record for, respecting autonomy, and he's very much prone to blame the victim who is invaded. Yeah. I know that Trump doesn't really have much of a concept of, consent. But that's not but like to make that claim is so fucking divorced from reality that I honestly don't even know what to say at this point. Like that's so easily disprovable. Everyone saw it. Everyone saw the fact that Russia is the one that invaded Ukraine. And even Fox News is having interviews where they're talking to Trump about this, and they're like, okay, but we agree that Russia's the one that actually invaded it, right? Like these are fucking people that have been kissing his ass for the last like 8 fucking years. Yep. And even they're just like Brian Kilmeade is interviewing him, and he's like, okay, but Russia did start this. Like Russia did start this. Okay. Yeah. So like,
I think, and it's not just Trump. It's like actually, like it's his administration too. So we know that it's not like Trump misspeaking, which he's apt to do because he's bad at thinking. But we know that it's not just mistakes because that we have got like other people in his administration moving towards this line. So specifically, his like special envoy to his peace negotiations with Russia that we'll talk about some more, Steve Witkoff, said, quote, "The war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by Russians." Right? That was Steve Witkoff, like Trump's representative. And then Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, right, when asked, to Nathan's point, on Fox News Sunday about like whether it was provoked and aiming to agree that Russia started this war, Pete Hegseth said it was, quote, fair to say it's a very complicated situation. And Witkoff went on.
Not.
And Witkoff went on to say later to when he was declining to blame Russians, like basically saying again that Russia was provoked because of Ukraine's ambitions to join NATO, which was, quote, a threat to Russians, right? And it's like, why would that be a threat to Russians? Maybe because Russia finds NATO a threat, and like maybe Witkoff skipped the NATO day in school or whatever because, like, I don't know, the U.S. founded NATO literally as a way to resist Russian aggression. And so it's like, it's just not an accident that they're declining to say Russia invaded, that they are shifting the blame to Ukraine, specifically in order to undermine the Ukrainian case for, sovereignty and the push to resist Russia. And they're even doing this at the UN, right? So first, the U.S. opposed a European drafted resolution which condemned Moscow's actions on the third anniversary of their invasion of Ukraine.
And they were just one of 18 countries that voted against the resolution. Other countries that voted against that resolution, obviously Russia, North Korea, Belarus, Sudan. I mean, here's the thing. We've talked a lot on this pod in the past about various instances in which the United States has really not been the good guy historically.
Yeah.
But most of the examples that we point to about the United States not being the good guy is not to say that the other side was the good guy. Like in Vietnam, the United States, we were the bad guys, but the Viet Cong, they were also not great.
Yeah, they were also bad guys. Yeah.
They were also bad guys. In Afghanistan, we were bad guys. Russia was bad guys. The Mujahideen were bad guys. There were lots of bad guys. In the case of even in the Israel-Palestine conflict, the United States and Israel are bad guys. Hamas are also bad guys. Now, in each of those cases, the good guys are the civilians who are basically just
caught in the
threshold. This is just one of those cases where just unambiguously we are the bad guys to the good, and the other side is the good guys. Ukraine is uncomplicated. They're the uncomplicated good guys, and we're the uncomplicated bad guys.
Yep, totally. Yeah, and so the Trump administration also called for Ukraine to withdraw an annual resolution that they put forward at the United Nations, condemning the Russian invasion, calling for sanctions from the International Criminal Court, doing all of these things, and United States countered with their own resolution, basically saying hey, we push for an end to the war. We want an agreement from both sides that brings this conflict to an end. It's so sad that people died and all that stuff, which one UN official said, quote, many representatives of other nations say that this looks more like a call for appeasement with Putin rather than a call for peace.
Yeah.
So that's where we kind of sit right now, where the Trump administration, from the very beginning, has been ceding power and ground in this negotiation to Putin, which brings us to some of the peace negotiations that the U.S. is now trying to broker with Russia. So in these peace negotiations, first off, no representatives from Europe or Ukraine are even included in these negotiations, which means that it is just the two superpowers attempting to negotiate how they're going to force essentially Ukraine to do whatever conclusion they come to. And again, Witkoff, who is Trump's envoy to the Mideast and is the one kind of leading these negotiations, has described the trip as spending a lot of time with President Putin and talking and developing a friendship and a relationship with him. Yeah.
You know what? I just want to reiterate, I stand by the last time we did an episode where we were talking about the Russia-Ukraine invasion. When I said specifically that the way that this should end is some oligarch gets annoyed at all of the fucking sanctions in the United States and puts a fucking bullet in Putin's head, I stand by that.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
stand by
agree.
that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked through the carnage in a lot of the cities in Ukraine. There is no redeeming
Yeah.
Putin as a despot.
It's just it's just appeasement. At this point,
Yeah.
it is appeasement. You give them anything, that is appeasement.
Totally. And so and that's really what we're talking about here. So things like reestablishing diplomatic relations has been floated, and like overall like some kind of appeasement. I know that early on in a statement to the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Brussels, Pete Hegseth said, like, you know, Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, like restoring Ukraine's like internationally recognized borders is unrealistic, and that their NATO membership is an unrealistic outcome. Basically, like starting off the negotiations, like ceding a ton of ground to Putin. And Trump is like describing these talks as going really well. Meanwhile, Putin is saying, like, we have not talked in detail about how to resolve this thing. And yet, you know, as we talked about, like this whole time, Ukraine is just not even being included in these discussions.
Yeah. And look, I would say that the question of NATO, I think that is actually complicated.
It
like that,
is
the question of NATO
course.
is absolutely complicated, because the fact, you know, and this is what I said when there was a Democrat president, and I'm saying it again now. If Ukraine joins NATO right now, then it's World War III.
Yeah,
like
totally.
Because the way that NATO works is that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, which means that because they are currently at war with Russia, if they joined NATO, then we would all be under obligation to join in that war, which means it would just be World War III. Now, whether or not joining NATO should be a part of, you know, should be under consideration for after the war is over, I honestly don't know. Like I don't know where I stand on that. Again, I'm critical of it because I do have concerns about World War III. But as Michael pointed out, that should not be something that is off the table.
Sure.
That
at the start of the negotiations.
At the start of the negotiations. Like that should be something that should basically be looming over Putin as a threat. Like that should be one of those things that's looming over him as a threat. And, you know, perhaps you trade, okay, we're not going to have them join NATO, but you have to restore their borders. Like, you know, but you're starting from a position of weakness at this point.
Exactly. Especially because it's so clear that Trump is so desperate for this deal to seem deal-y, right? And to make progress. Like he's literally in a joint press conference with Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. He was literally describing how well the negotiations were going and how much progress they were making, and like expecting to be able to sit down with Putin within the month and all this stuff. Meanwhile, in Russian state TV, Putin is like, we haven't really discussed details. We're making, you know, progress is slow. We're not. And so it's like, it's just clear that they're really entering this discussion appeasing Putin and Russia. What's interesting also is like they're leaving Ukraine out of these conversations, which like is obviously a problem because how could they negotiate over Ukraine without them having a seat at the table? But at the same time, President Zelenskyy has said that they are not willing to like sign on to a deal that Ukraine isn't a part of, that the Ukraine wasn't consulted on and helped develop. And in response to this, Trump has gone like scorched fucking earth on Zelenskyy. So in resisting this initial push, or in response to that, Trump has like publicly attacked Zelenskyy. He has called him a dictator without elections. He's like waved like veiled threats, like he better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Even echoing the Russian talking point that basically Ukraine has to hold a presidential election as a precondition for starting negotiations. Yeah. Now, that might sound normal, right? Like, hey, we want elections, obviously. Yeah. but it's clearly just a Russian tactic, literally a Russian talking point and a Russian tactic to string along negotiations and avoid them, because the Ukrainian constitution right now, since being invaded, Ukraine has been under martial law, which is kind of what happens when your country is fucking invaded.
Yeah.
Their constitution prohibits them from holding an election while under martial law. Makes sense. If you're under martial law, you wouldn't want someone to be able to rig elections by holding them, right?
And that's the thing. Like, if they tried to hold an election, it would not be a fair election. Like, they can't hold a fair election.
It would be literally impossible, is what the Ukrainian government has said.
Exactly. Like, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, there is approximately 6.9 million Ukrainian refugees that are resettled in various places worldwide as of February of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't be able to vote.
Yeah.
There is approximately 800,000 soldiers that are currently serving in the Ukrainian armed forces, many of which are in an active struggle for, against Russians. So either they basically have to say, all right, you have to pull out of here real quick so you can go vote and then go back in, which is unrealistic, or you have to just say, well, none of you can vote, none of you can run. That's the other thing. Like, if they tried to hold an election right now, there would be no way, like, the number of people that would actually be able to run would be super limited. Now, look, I want to be clear. I am very critical of the concept of martial law in almost every circumstance.
Agreed.
This is literally the only circumstance in which it fucking makes sense.
Yes.
And I am critical of, of a leader staying in past their terms in almost every circumstance. This is literally the only circumstance in which it makes fucking sense.
Totally.
Like, and Trump is just repeating this bullshit talking point. He also claimed that Zelensky's support had hit rock bottom. He claimed that he's down to a 4% approval rating. Now, honestly, that number doesn't even fucking pass the sniff test.
Yeah.
Like,
well, to be fair, a 4% net approval rating is like better than Biden last term. So.
No. Not a 4% net approval rating, a 4% approval rating.
Whoa.
As in only 4% of the country approves of him.
That doesn't seem right.
That doesn't pass the
That's
sniff
like
test.
just the people in the government.
Yeah, when you consider the fact that, like, this dude has been fighting alongside Ukrainians, and like maybe that support has waned a bit because people are tired of I don't know, but the actual most recent reporting about public trust shows it at 57%.
Yes. Yeah.
And according to the Kiev Institute of Sociology, and speaking in Kiev, just today, Wednesday, while we were recording this, he basically said that he wants to make sure that there are some pollsters that start conducting surveys so that he can give you so he can give some accurate information to show the Trump administration.
Yeah.
The problem is, dude, like, it doesn't matter what you show the Trump administration. It doesn't matter what facts. He doesn't care about facts.
Totally.
He doesn't give a shit.
Because the 4% number is directly listed, again, from Russian propaganda state TV.
Yeah.
That is where that number comes from. Yeah. And again, to your point, to counteract this narrative that Zelensky is a power-hungry dictator, right? He literally volunteered to step down if that is what it takes to get sufficient U.S. support in order to shift the war in their direction. He said, quote, "If, to achieve peace, you really need me to give up my post, I'm ready. I can exchange it for NATO membership. I don't plan to stay in power for decades. But we won't let Putin stay in power over Ukraine territories either."
Yeah.
So then I think, so all of this to me, it's weird, right? He like is going after Zelensky, an ostensible ally. He's kowtowing to Trump or to Putin and like starting off the negotiations on this weak footing, which is like, all of this seems really weird until you realize that grifters are going to fucking grift.
Yeah.
Because it's become clear that it's not about Ukraine or freeing them or ending the war, ending the carnage. It's about extorting Ukraine for protection money in order to cut a cushy deal for our access to their rare earth minerals.
There is an initial draft for a deal to guarantee continued support for Ukraine. And the initial draft demanded $500 billion in mineral wealth, basically up front, and then 50% of all mineral wealth in perpetuity.
Yes.
After that.
Forever.
And I want to be clear about something. That would have been a bigger blow to the Ukrainian economy, to the Ukrainian GDP, than the fucking Treaty of Versailles was to the German economy. Literally, this is a worse deal for the Ukrainians than the Treaty of Versailles was to the Germans. You know, the deal that basically destroyed their economy, that made it so that that people were literally burning their money because it actually made more sense to burn it than to use it to buy wood because it was a more efficient use of it. You know, the treaty that literally led to the rise of fucking Hitler because things got so fucking bad in Ukraine.
Yep.
That was the initial deal that he put out there. And, you know, it was interesting because I was sitting there thinking, like, what, you know, there obviously there's a level of imperialism, but, you know, what is so important about Ukraine? What is so important about mineral wealth in Ukraine? And then I noticed something in an article that was pointing out the specific type of mineral that Ukraine actually has in abundance. In fact, more so than any other European nation. Lithium. Lithium is one of the primary minerals that is used in the creation of Tesla vehicles. Interesting. Interesting that the mineral that is used in the vehicle that fucking Elon Musk, who, you know, is basically who basically bought the White House for Donald Trump. Interesting that just so happens to have a high, like, that just so happens to have large deposits in the country of Ukraine, and that right now, suddenly, Trump is very interested in access to those mineral deposits. I wonder what is fucking going on.
Yeah, totally. Because 75% of Musk's wealth as over the last few years is Tesla stock. That's how he makes his money. And so, exactly. And Ukraine is a key player in these rare earth minerals like lithium, gallium, and other minerals that, to Nathan's point, are for electric car batteries, solar panels, but also military equipment. And Ukraine has approximately 5% of the world's supply of these minerals. So it is a treasure trove. And so what we have here, right, is essentially, to Nathan's point, like a proposal that would put them in the position of like a 19th century colony being stripped of their minerals, where like we're essentially holding them hostage between giving us that and allowing Russia to take them over. And Trump has said we want our money back. Right, we're going to get a good deal out of this so that we can make all the money back that we wanted. And his U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who's the one that brought this deal to Ukraine, right? He said that, so one of the other important things about the deal is that it does not actually include, or did not actually include, any security guarantees. Yeah. So basically what they get is almost nothing. It's like a nod that will help them out. And what they give up is their whole economy. Yeah. And Bessent described this as like an implicit guarantee that if the United States of America is heavily invested in the economic future of Ukraine, I call it an economic security guarantee. Like, this is fucking mob boss shit. It's just like, hey, if our incentives are aligned such that you're my drug mule, and as long as you mule my drugs good for me, I'll take care of you. That is what we're literally bringing to the table here. And unfortunately, it appears like these tactics are starting to work. Yeah. So Zelenskyy is like at the table, right? Coming to talk about this negotiation. Apparently the administrations have agreed to a framework for the negotiation. Generally speaking, like the broad outline that we've seen so far is that it will include preferential and partial access to Ukraine's minerals, oil, and gas supply, as well as, it may include some kind of security guarantee for Ukraine, and will include like a ongoing commitment to support their efforts in Ukraine, and will not, according to Zelensky's administration, be as large as the extent of this like $500 billion commitment, or like control over their resources. But it seems like they're also pretty far apart on this negotiation, and it seems like there's probably a lot like more room to go before they'll have an actual conclusion.
Yeah. And another thing I need people to also understand is that Trump is straight up lying about how much money we actually gave them. He's claiming that we gave them $350 billion. We actually gave them $183 billion. So nearly half of what he says. And he's also claiming basically that they don't even know where half the money went. That like it just, they gave the money to Ukraine and Ukraine just blew it. It disappeared or whatever in Ukraine. And the basis of that is that approximately about $70 billion worth of military aid was delivered directly to Ukraine, and then another $6 billion was in the form of things like training for soldiers, humanitarian relief, infrastructure recovery, stuff like that. And the rest of it, Zelensky said like he didn't know where that went. Now, importantly, that number is the money that was specifically appropriated by Congress. But one thing that's important to understand is that when it comes to congressional appropriations for some specific cause that involving international aid, especially when it comes to supporting another country militarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that every cent of that is going to be spent in that country. All right, because keep in mind, some of that money is going to actually be spent in the United States in order to pay military manufacturers to actually create the weapons or to potentially replace old equipment, which is then given to Ukraine. So like, we give them some of our older stuff that we don't use as much, and then we replace it with new equipment. So that the rest of that money is going into things like that. It's going into financing the surge of United States troops that are in some of the countries that are surrounding Ukraine. It's not like we just sent them $100 billion and they just said, oopsie, where'd it go? And he just misplaced it. That's not what happened. All right. Problem is, Trump is a fucking idiot.
Exactly. That would require nuance to understand that's not what happened.
That would require nuance to understand, and Trump is too fucking stupid to understand nuance.
Yeah. So overall, the takeaway here is this is about Trump trying to extract resources from Ukraine using the threat of giving into Russia as like a cudgel, and overall like just giving away the farm with regards to this whole negotiation, and doing a really terrible job and potentially putting Ukraine into an incredibly dangerous corner. And that from our deal maker in chief. So now it's time for a more lighthearted segment, a Here's Why That's Bullshit. So Nathan, what's Here's Why That's Bullshit?
Well, Michael, every now and then there is a talking point or a piece of misinformation or disinformation that is spread widely that too many people believe. And, it might sound reasonable based, at face value, but sometimes all it takes is just a little bit of digging to realize that the claim is actually quite bullshit. And since that has kind of become my unofficial catchphrase on this pod, we made a segment out of it. So, Michael, what type of bullshit are we here's whying it? Here's whying. I don't know how I fucking say it. Today.
So, recently, I think we've all been aware of a trend in the news. We have heard a lot about some really high-profile plane crashes It makes us feel like planes are unsafe. They're crashing left and right. We had some high-profile ones, like 67 people who died in an American Airlines crash when it collided with a helicopter over D.C., which was the first like high-profile commercial aviation crash of this type in like more than 15 years. We also had really terrifying footage of a Delta flight that flipped over and burst into flames on a Toronto runway. And so overall, it feels like air travel has gotten significantly more dangerous, less safe, and it seems like there are a lot more plane crashes that are happening now than ever before. And a lot of people have also tried to tie this directly to the Trump administration, right? Because he is undermining the FAA, and as a result, planes are crashing at unprecedented rates. So here's why that's bullshit. Planes aren't crashing at unprecedented rates. While he is undermining the FAA, and that will have consequences down the road, as of now, the U.S. has not experienced more plane crashes than normal, nor have we experienced more fatal plane crashes than normal, nor have we experienced more commercial plane crashes than normal. Overall, we actually have been on a trend of increasing safety over time. So according to preliminary data from the National Transportation Safety Board, January 2025 was a record low number of plane accidents nationwide when you combine private and commercial flights. So most of the 62 total airplane crashes and accidents were private flights, and that's really important, right? Commercial flights crash at very, very low rates, but private planes and small planes are much less safe. Overall, though, even in combination, that was 18 less than the 80 recorded in 2024. If these kind of preliminary numbers hold, January 2025 will surpass our previous record low number of total accidents, with 8 fewer than the prior record low in 2012. And also at the same time, the number of fatal accidents nationwide last month was also tied with the record low in 2022. And overall, this is part of a continued trend in increased commercial safety, where the number of fatalities on commercial airlines over the last 15 years was significantly fewer than the years before that. So overall, there has been a significant media focus on this, and with the 67 people who died in an in-air collision, which is not common, getting a lot of attention, that makes a lot of sense that we would all be aware of this. But given that this is just a couple of flights over the approximate 9 million commercial flights that are operated in the U.S. every year, the fact is that it is just not a statistically significant number of accidents, and the ones that have happened are less likely and less frequent than in previous years.
So what you're telling me is that it's not because we've hired too many black transgender lesbians with dwarfism.
That remains to be seen.
And that's why that's bullshit.
So for our next segment, we're talking about one of our favorite topics, Democrats. So Democrats have had a lot of problems, mainly evidenced by the fact that we got our asses handed to us in November. A lot of people have been focused on Democratic messaging, right? You've heard claims like Democrats just aren't reaching Black and Latino voters. You've heard claims like Democrats aren't speaking to young men, or things like the Democrats are not equipped to reach people in a digital age, or things like despite Biden's record, people just aren't aware of the improvements that he's made that are affecting their lives, right? And then other people, as we are often likely to do, focus more on policy, right? The Democrats aren't getting credit or the attention they deserve because they're just not delivering for people, right?
Yeah.
Or like healthcare for all isn't even part of the conversation, or things like we're facing, an inflation crisis, a housing affordability crisis, a homelessness crisis, a healthcare affordability crisis, and Democrats are the adults in the room, and they're just not able to deliver on these things. And then the last kind of angle to this thing that we hear a lot, and I'm sure you've heard if you've spoken to like any independents or moderates, is a slightly different take, which is like the Democrats promise all kinds of good stuff, but they never do any of it. And so government in general, or at least under Democrats, is ineffective. So we might as well go for the people who are going to cut our taxes.
Yeah.
And overall, I think these are all kind of different angles to a similar problem. But like the diagnosis is like, what is it? Like, are we out of touch? Are we focused on the wrong things? Are we just ineffective messengers? And like one thing I'm worried about is that a lot of people are focused on the messaging angle, which I think is important. Yeah. But like as part of like the election for the Democratic Party chair, one of the main hotly debated things that they were like debating, aside of course from fundraising, was like how they were going to reach like voters in the digital age, which presumes that we're doing everything right from a policy perspective. And I think that presumption is dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, look, we do need to give Biden credit where credit is due on certain things. All right?
Sure.
We need to give Biden credit for the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a historic investment in green energy. Mm-hmm. We need to give Biden credit for the PACT Act, which guaranteed health care to soldiers who were victims of toxic burn pits. Mm-hmm. We need to give Biden credit for the CHIPS Act, which was a historic investment in computer chips, many of which are used for electric vehicles nowadays that are necessary for the future. We also need to give him credit for the fact that under him, the NLRB actually, for the first time, expanded labor union ownership, and actually fought for workers' rights, actually did a pretty good job of fighting for workers' rights. We have to give the Biden administration credit for things like how under him, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau made it so that credit cards cannot fuck with your credit score because of medical debt. All right. There's a lot of good stuff that Biden did do. And to some extent, one of the issues that I think Harris had when she was running was that there were some good things that Biden did, and there were some good policies that she had economically. However, she really didn't spend as much time focusing on them and spent much more time focusing on, the message of Donald Trump being a threat to democracy, which he was. Yeah. He very much is.
Sure. But it put Democrats in the position of being the defender of the status quo and institutions.
Exactly.
Which people, generally speaking, don't think work anyway. So telling people how you're going to make it work for them is way more powerful and important than telling people how you're going to preserve the thing that doesn't work for them.
Exactly. And not to mention, then kind of shifting the area into some policy failures of the Biden administration that we just need to address. Number one, on foreign policy, there was a massive amount of young voters and Arab Americans, specifically in the states of Wisconsin, in the states of Michigan, and there was actually a surprising number in the state of Arizona that actually cited as their primary reason for not voting for Harris, meaning either they stayed home or they voted third party, the war in Gaza. And the fact that Harris basically said, I'm going to be exactly like Biden, and directly said that, the idea of a weapons embargo was off the table, that is a policy failure of the Biden administration that she was continuing to carry. Also, one of the biggest issues that is at the top of American minds is healthcare.
Yeah.
All right. And we saw in 2020 that basically a majority of the debate in the Democratic primary surrounded healthcare. All right. Yeah. Biden spent so much time talking about how star-spangled awesome a public option would be, in the attempt to shit all over Medicare for all. And yet, when he actually got elected to office with control of the House and the Senate, he didn't even try to go for a public option.
Yeah.
He stopped talking about a public option. He stopped talking about any healthcare reform. The only healthcare reform that happened was as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Medicare was able to negotiate drug prices for 10 drugs.
Yeah.
And that
huge progress relative to no drugs, but
yeah, but there's
not
still
enough.
there's still a lot of drugs that,
Yeah.
we can't. And, and Jon Stewart actually did a segment this week where he basically pointed out those drugs, and this is something we've talked about too, those fucking drugs are subsidized by us.
Yeah.
Remember when we did our segment where we talked about the pharmaceutical industry, how basically we as taxpayers, we usually we provide the funding for the early stages of drugs to figure out if they're worth the risk. And once a drug is shown promise, that is when these pharmaceutical industry companies swoop in, buy the patents, finish the research, and then finish the research and development because the risk is basically the risk has been mitigated at this point. It's a sound investment, and then they jack the prices up on drugs that we fucking subsidized in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. 10 is better than none, but come the fuck on, bro.
Totally. I totally agree with you. And Democrats will say, we'll point to all of the progress that you pointed out and celebrate it as if it is a celebration of the destination.
Yeah.
As opposed to celebrating it like, hey, we've done these things for you. You deserve more, right? We owe you more and better things. And I think you can only, despite the fact that those, to your point, are good. 10 is better. 10 drugs is better than no drugs, but not good enough. And I think we know that. I think the people that are interested in these things, which is the majority of people, like healthcare, a right to universal healthcare polls very highly, right? People want these things, but I think people recognize that it's not good enough. Right? Reducing inflation is great, but my costs are still too high and my wages are not keeping up with it. It's just not good enough to celebrate and say you're just going to do the same thing. And so I think that's where Democrats start to come, and especially the switching, Biden moving away from a public option, which he thought was the best thing as soon as he got into office, or even on immigration, right? First and foremost, Democrats should make the argument for immigration, the affirmative argument for immigration, but also retreating to the conservative position on immigration only when it seems politically expedient is exactly what people hate about Democrats, right? Because and makes them think that they are just another politician. Because I think that's it. I don't think you can actually message your way out of tiny incremental improvements that people deserve way more from. And I don't think you can message your way out of actually only responding to the political expediency of the moment. So I don't think it's just we need the right message. I think we need the right lawmakers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's really hard to get past someone like Kirsten Sinema, right? Yeah. Who's obviously, not in there anymore, but at the time was giving unapologetic, favors to pharmaceutical companies, right? Yeah. Or voting against closing the carried interest loophole, essentially directly as a result of hedge fund funding.
Yeah.
For to her. And or the fact that members of Congress, I think this is a point you make all the time, Nathan, can own individual stocks and so are doing insider trading and are benefiting from the results of their own votes. And so I just don't think there's actually getting past the corrupting influence of that position if you don't have the right kind of people in the job.
And let's also acknowledge that the initial fight that the Biden administration was trying to do in terms of going back to the pharmaceutical example, the initial fight was the negotiation of all drug prices for Medicare.
Yeah.
And they negotiated down from that because of Kirsten Sinema, because she got bribed by a bunch of pharmaceutical companies. They negotiated down from that to 10 drugs.
Yeah.
Honestly, a valid argument could be made to just fucking nationalize pharmaceuticals because we're already paying for the risks at the back end. Now, you know, as we talked about in that other segment, the private sector does spend more money on the research and development of drugs, but it's important to note that we're the ones that actually do the risky investments.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what I'm saying, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what we should do. I'm saying that's where we should start the negotiation at.
Yeah.
Like that is basically where we should start the negotiation at. And the thing is, the Democratic approach to this last election, for too many of them, has just been basically, as we were kind of talking about in the last segment, has been basically appeasement.
Yeah.
In a closed door discussion among Democrats, Representative Tom Suzy, who represents a Trump district in Long Island, said, quote, "The natural inclination is to fight, 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 fight. That's what got us to this point."
Yeah.
How fucking out of touch do you have to be to believe that? How
know.
fucking out of touch do you have to be to believe that? Here's the thing that Democrats need to understand, all right? Tweaks around the edges of a system that people view as inherently corrupt, on a system that people view as part of the problem,
Yeah.
you know, tweaks of institutions or even just the straight up arguments of preserving institutions that people feel are just not working for them
Yeah.
is not going to fucking work.
Yeah.
Right now in America, the bottom 50% of Americans own just 2.4% of the entire nation's wealth. The bottom 50% own 2.4% of the nation's wealth. The top 0.1% own approximately the same amount of wealth as the bottom 90%. Approximately 50% of Americans in the last year alone cited the cost of healthcare as a reason for going without healthcare. Like the cost of healthcare prevented them from seeking healthcare. All right? Yeah, medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. All right? These are systems that are inherently corrupt. Our system of taxation is inherently corrupt. The top 25 Americans in terms of wealth, all right? Their effective tax rate is about 4%. Meanwhile, what percentage of your paycheck did you have to pay? Did you have to pay in terms of taxation last year? All right, on average, the average working class American, it's about 25%. All right, it's around 25%.
And that's like income tax and stuff, right? Or does that also include like sales tax?
That's effective tax. That's the effective tax. All right, that's the effective tax of the average American is approximately 25%, whereas the effective tax of the top 25 richest people in America is about 4%. That is an inherently corrupt system. Yeah. All right. The fact that those people have an excess amount of control over politicians in the form of super PAC donations. Yeah. Even if Americans don't understand what Citizens United is, even if they don't understand how super PACs work, it doesn't matter what party you're in. It doesn't matter what your political ideology is in.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that if you are rich, you have more political influence because that is how our system works. Yeah. All right. The Democrats need to critique the system itself. All right.
Yeah.
They need to spend all of their time railing against corruption in Congress in terms of, as Michael pointed out, stocks, corruption in terms of super PACs, corruption in terms of dark money, and just money in politics in general. They need to rail against the current system of healthcare that is basically just it's a mafia. Yeah. All right. Health insurance is basically just a mafia middleman that their only job is to get between you and your doctor. All right. And somehow Republicans and conservative Democrats have been able to make the argument that, oh, well, we want to preserve health insurance because of choice, You know what would actually give you choice? Is if we got rid of the concept of out of network. How many times have you had to choose a doctor, not because you wanted to choose that doctor, but because they were in network for your health insurance? What if there was just one network? So you wouldn't have to do that. You would have more choice under a single payer Medicare for all system. And yet these bullshitters, these shysters, these charlatans try to convince you that a single-payer healthcare system, which has been implemented successfully in 17 other countries around the world, they try to convince you that that would reduce your choice. We need a Democratic Party that is boldly standing up for these values, that is boldly standing against the corrupt system.
Yeah.
And the question is, who is it? Like, who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now? Who is actually standing up to Trump? Because there sure as hell is a lot of appetite for standing up to Trump. All right. Yeah. There were protests in all 50 states on President's Day. There were hundreds of thousands of Americans that came out and protested Donald Trump. There were protesters in front of the Treasury when Doge was trying to was taking them over. There were massive protests regarding immigration. Against the immigration policy in Los Angeles. There is a hunger for a resistance. Fucking seize the moment.
Totally. Yeah. It's remarkable to me that one of the things that I was listening to some interviews for the Democratic Party chair with the people that were running for it, and they all got asked like similar questions about money and politics, right? And none of them had an answer that was get money out of politics. It was all, we've got to pick the right super PACs. Mm. It was stunning.
Yeah.
It was stunning. And the thing is, like, to your point, Nathan, if people feel like the system isn't working for them, they will try to burn it down. And that's how people like Trump get into office. And that's how people that want to make things better and work within a system to like improve it lose power, right?
And the thing is, and that's how vigilantes who shoot healthcare executives in the street suddenly become folk heroes overnight.
Totally. Exactly. And that's why it feels gratifying for people when they see people like Elon Musk do irreparable harm to our government, right? Because they think like blowing it up might just be the only way to fix it, right? And the thing is, like, to your point, people feel like the system isn't working for them because it isn't. And we can't message our way out of that. We can't message our way into claiming that incremental appeasement measures are the goal, right? Because that is not the system working, right? And right now the systems are, or the incentives just aren't aligned to deliver for the American people, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Like there is no incentive in government right now to deliver success for the American people. Right. And so, and deliver what the average American needs. And so ultimately there isn't a way out of this for the Democratic Party or even any Republican without like changing the things that are corrupting the system. You know, to your point, real penalties for people that are owning individual stocks or trading with exclusive information or peddling their influence in a way that benefits themselves. Like a reversal of Citizens United and or like exclusive like public funding of elections. Right? Yeah. Real commitment to the Hatch Act and real consequences for violation, like real things, right, that are going to put a firewall, and not even a firewall. A firewall is not actually going to be, like, a wall is not going to be effective, right? Because, like, it's not even a good metaphor. People just go around it or over it. They find loopholes, all that stuff. It's not about a firewall. It's about taking away the incentives to try to work for corrupting the system to begin with. And if we can remove those incentives from the system, there actually is a chance that public servants, in the form of our representatives, have a good reason to listen to us and provide the things that we all need. But it's got to start with the root of the problem. And unfortunately, there's no incentive to solve that thing either. I'm not sure how it happens. I'm not sure how we do it, honestly. But there's not like a way to get to a sufficient, like there'll be one-offs, right? Bernie Sanders or people that don't accept PAC money, like AOC, like there are politicians in the role. but they will always be cast as the fringe.
Yeah.
Right? As long as the majority of elected folks are doing it for personal gain and incentives, because they have a vested interest in casting these people as the fringe and not putting them in positions of significant authority, not putting them front and center as messengers, because it's too much of a threat to their personal interest in staying in their position, getting paid as much as they can.
And here's my roadmap for that. We can learn something from Trump. Because the thing you need to understand is that Trump has basically foregone most of his party to deliver messages straight to the people.
Yeah.
And he is so popular among the Republican Party, among Republican voters, that anytime people go against him, they suffer. Now, importantly, when it comes to going against Trump or not going against Trump, the focus is less on policy and more about just saying nice things about him, or believing that the election was stolen, or peripherally saying that you hate immigrants or whatever. Like, that's what the focus is on. It's not about, fundamental policy. Like, a lot of Trump's ardent supporters will say they believe one thing. We'll say they're anti-war and they love Trump because he's anti-war. But then we'll find ways to defend the fact that he wants to fucking start a war with Greenland and the Panama Canal and Mexico and Canada. Like, it's less about policy. But we can still learn something from the fact that the establishment Republicans are terrified of Trump because they're terrified of Trump's base. And what we can learn from that is that leaders who actually focus on policy, leaders who are uncorrupted, who don't take PAC money, leaders who are actual fighters, they need to be propped up more and more to the point where they become so popular and their policies become so popular that the rest of the Democratic Party is afraid of them, all right? That they are bullied into submission. Because that's what needs to happen. The rest of the Democratic Party basically just needs to be bullied into submission to support actually changing the system. Because otherwise, they're not going to. They care about keeping their power. And in their minds, the way that they keep their power is by basically kowtowing to corporate interests, because corporate interests have a stranglehold over them. But if we make it if we make sure that they know that they are punished even more if they go against these important changes to the system, then they will have no choice but to go along with it. Now, right now, Bernie Sanders is actually going on this fight oligarchy tour, where he's going around the country doing rallies. By the way, doing rallies that are fucking packed, because there is a hunger for fighters right now. There is a hunger for fighters, and it's not just leftists or liberals. It's people that understand that the system is broken and they need to see somebody who is actually doing something about it. Now, look, Bernie Sanders is 83 years old. It's kind of sad that he's the only one who's actually showing leadership within the Democratic Party right now, because there's no reason why it should be left up to some dude who's 83 years old. I mean, Jesus Christ. If this dude ran for president, by the end of his first term, he'd be in his 90s.
Not realistic.
Probably not realistic. I mean, but we do need to pay attention to which leaders are actually going to be the biggest fighters right now. And right now, I'm seeing AOC, I'm seeing Ro Khanna. Those are the type of people we need to be propping up. All right. But to be clear, when I say prop those people up to the extent that we support their policies, not to the extent that we support them as people. That we don't want to create a cult of personality. That's not what I'm advocating for. Prop them up to the extent that the policy, that as long as they are saying the right policies, that they're being, that they're being supported, they are being, that those policies are being elevated, and that the rest of the Democratic Party gets to the point where they're so afraid of their base, that they're as afraid of their base as the Republicans are of theirs, that they have no choice but to go along with these policies. And if you do that, you beat Trump. If you are able to prop up candidates to create a Democratic Party that people actually convinced are going to fight to change the system, to not just tweaks around the edges, but to fundamentally change the system that people view as broken, you will win. I'll say it again, like I said it before. Making people life better, making people want voting for you. Not making people life better, not making people want voting for you.
And now it's time for one of our favorite segments, a D-Bag Award. So Nathan, what's a D-Bag?
Well, a D-Bag is an award that we like to give out to people that make just the stupidest, most self-defeating arguments imaginable. And of course, it's D-Bag stands for Dershowitz bag, named after Alan Dershowitz, for that fateful time that he stood in front of Congress and proclaimed that Trump could not have possibly done anything that rose to the level of impeachment when he, coerced Ukraine to interfere in our election by promising them a weapons deal, because he believed it was within the nation's best interest for him to win that election.
Oh, man. Never fails to hit.
Never fails to hit. Never fails to hit. And I also, even... and since then, I realized that he actually took out an op-ed in, I believe it was either I think it was the 90s, where he was trying to argue for why there shouldn't be statutory rape laws. Because
who took out the op-ed?
Dershowitz.
What the fuck?
Alan Dershowitz made that argument.
He was like, you know what? You should be able to have sex with a child of any age.
So Michael,
now that's a D-bag.
That is a D-bag, and I gotta say, like, I'm not sure that we can top that. Like, who could possibly rise to the level of the legendary Alan Dershowitz in terms of terrible arguments?
That is, it's something that we haven't touched it yet, but I think maybe this one gives it a run for its money.
Okay.
So let's introduce Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Meatball Ron!
Meatball Ron. Ronnie Puddin' Fingers coming on down to the D-Bag office. So in Florida, Ron DeSantis has decided to take another cue from Donald Trump. And he announced the establishment of a Florida Doge task force, right? So this will be similar to, Trump's Doge agency. This will specifically focus on limiting waste from the Florida government. It will focus on reducing unnecessary spending. It will focus on finding, and eliminating unnecessary jobs, and overall just waste from the Florida government, and ensure that it's reducing bureaucratic bloat and ensure accountability for the Floridian taxpayers by getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. So you might ask, how is that a D-bag, right? I mean, sure, we might disagree with Doge, but is that really self-defeating on its face? Well, the problem is when you combine that with another little factoid. So with the exception of the the governor of Florida in 2010, who is an independent, Republicans have controlled the Senate, the House, and the governor's mansion in Florida since 1999. 26 fucking years of running the government, and they're basically admitting that there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse that they need a special task force. So if there's waste, fraud, and abuse, Ronnie Puddin' Fingers, it's coming from inside the house, motherfucker.
Oh, God, you did not think that one through, Meatball, did you?
We're going after all the waste, fraud, and abuse that me, my government, and my party have caused.
See, it's it's funny because, the old adage is that Republicans get elected by saying that government fucks everything up. And then they get elected, and then they fuck everything up. And then they point to the mess that they created and say, see, I told you, the government fucks everything up. And the thing is, that's only sustainable if, like, it has, like, the government is occasionally run by other people that you can then kind of pretend, like, oh, that's all them.
That was all them, yeah.
But, like, that strategy only works
if you haven't controlled the government for 26 fucking years.
If you haven't controlled the government for 26 years.
Yep, seriously. So there you go. The causes of waste, fraud, and abuse in Florida are the ones now trying to clean it up. So congratulations to Meatball Ronnie Pudding Fingers DeSantis for being this week's D-bag. And now we'll end our episode as we usually do with our highlights. So Nathan, what's your highlight this week?
My highlight this week is just that tournament travel is taking a pause until nationals, which means this week I've actually been able to spend a good amount of quality time with my kid. For the first time in weeks, I was able to take her to the park on a walk. Took her to the toddler park, and let her just run around back and forth on the equipment. And she just had so much fun, and she's just been so sweet, like so sweet this week. And I've been able to spend quality time with her finally, with everything. And I don't know, being a dad's great. Like being a dad's wonderful, great. Like I sometimes say, like, being a parent's the greatest joy in life, as kind of like a self-justification when things are really difficult. But honestly, like, it really is the greatest joy in life to be able to have it, to have a kid, to hear a kid laugh, to hold them, to be hugged by them. It's just nice. I'm happy with life.
That's awesome, dude. That's great.
What about you, Mike? What's your highlight, brother?
My highlight was we spent a long weekend this past weekend with friends in Whistler, which is a ski mountain in British Columbia, so up in Canada. And it was just great. Yeah, it was like a pretty relaxed weekend. We skied a couple of days. We hung out. We chilled, talked, had a great time. It was just really fun. Really fun to get out of the country. And really nice to, have a nice weekend away with friends.
Nice.
And now we'll thank all the amazing people that make this show possible. So thank you to our patrons, Jerry DeViller, Fade Out Scoop, Taylor Bloom, Kyle Chaska, and Tobias Janssen. And thank you to our amazing editor, Kayla, for all they do to make this show possible. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to The Perspectrum. And you'll hear from us again next week.